Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And a very good morning to everybody, wherever you are. Okay, in order for us to, before we start this session on alternative assessment in times of crisis, there are some things or maybe the do's and don'ts that we need to adhere to. So ladies and gentlemen, we are in a time of crisis, and that's the reason why I designed this particular training session, so that it will help everybody to identify what would be the suitable alternative assessment for your students, especially in helping you to plan what you have initially planned for a normal face-to-face semester. Unfortunately, because of the MCO, all of us have to now start thinking about alternatives. And therefore, we need to start thinking about how to redesign our lessons. And of course, alternative assessment will definitely be relevant. So in terms of the training, I will be discussing or touching on the introduction. So I'm doing that right now to give you an overview of what this whole training session is going to be. The next section will be on designing delivery for learning engagement. So we will look at how important it is for us to ensure that whatever mode that we are using, we are still making student-centered learning at the central focus of our design. And then after that, we will look at how to design lessons for alternative assessment. So we need to understand what is it all about, and followed by issues and challenges, because there are bound to be hiccups, there are bound to be barriers that we need to address, and if time permits and technology permits, we can have a go at trying to see or discuss about what kind of planning can be done using constructive alignment for you to do before we do our wrap up. So we're living in a very flexible condition. We're living in a VUCA world, basically. It's very volatile, unexpected. So here goes, and that's the reason why I think a few weeks ago we were gallivanting our way to the office or wherever, but now we're stuck in our homes. So no matter what happens, flexible education demands us to adapt to those changes, to those challenges that we are facing, and we have to continue to deliver and assess our students and ensure that they are actually learning. And in times of emergency like this, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic crisis, choosing alternative assessment to replace especially traditional face-to-face examination becomes inevitable. So we'll start with the first section, designing learning for learning engagement. So the nuts and bolts of this is basically, how do you ensure, even though your students is everywhere, they are learning meaningfully and they are having fun and they're not stressful. When we talk about learning engagement, we cannot run away from the idea of making students actually become very important, because we need to understand who they are, what they are, before we can design what will be suitable for them and ensure that they actually will eventually meet or achieve the learning outcome. So student-centered learning is very pertinent in whatever learning setting, be it in the face-to-face environment, which is conventional way of teaching, even when you see them in your classroom, or in this instance where they are away from you, or sometimes even in a remote situation where they actually learn through remote learning. So there are three elements that needs to be taken care of when you're doing understanding learning engagement, presage, process, and product. So when you're talking about presage, it's actually understanding the learner's background. So when we not only, well, in a normal situation, we will consider whether our students are actually kinesthetic kind of learners, are they visual kind of learners, are they auditory kind of learners, do they, lots of theories on different learning approaches and whatsoever. But in this instance, in times of crisis like this, what do I mean by learners' background is their ability, their facilities, their location, apart from the level of understanding and their prior knowledge. When it comes to process, we look at the learning outcomes. We never will run away from that learning outcomes. Be it if you are a teacher in schools or you're a lecturer, professor in the higher education, any learning environment will begin with the learning outcome. So when we're designing our delivery, we cannot run away from that. We need to make sure that we understand the learning outcomes, we understand the syllabus. Then only we can start thinking about the right student or the appropriate student activities that can make sense, can give sense to the students. And so that not only it challenges the student's mind, but you're always there to support them in diverse ways, not just being there for them, but in various ways, like providing resources, getting them to work with their other friends, and getting them to learn from each other, or learning from other experts when you bring them into the environment. It doesn't matter whether it's online or in a face-to-face situation. And finally is the product, where we actually we want to ensure whether the assessment is aligned to the learning outcomes and whether there is assurance of learning, there is evidence that students have met those learning outcomes, and not only students are stimulated and supported, but they achieve what is intended. So who are your students? This is what we need to know now. If we plan to start as quickly as possible, or plan to address the problems that they're facing, we need to know where they are, what they are going through, can they be contacted. So if you look at the slide, it says you've got to find out whether, what is their psychological well-being? Are they under control? Do they feel they are able to handle the situation? So you get to get that one sorted first, because if that's not sorted, no kind of delivery or assessment is going to be helpful for them. So you've got to assure them that you are there and you will do your utmost best to help them to complete the semester. But of course, to do that, you yourself need to be under control. So you need to make sure that we learn to keep calm and learn if we do not know, ask if we're not sure, and try even if we are afraid, so that we will be able to gain those confidence. And that confidence is actually the thing that's going to make you become better at doing, at facing this challenging time. So things that you need to find out from your students will be, can they be contacted? If they can't be contacted, what other ways can you ask them to, how can you contact them? Maybe through your friends, through the HEP. You got to get that one sorted. And you got to find out where they are. So are they in Malaysia? Are they abroad? In both contexts, can you reach them? In terms of calendar, do you have sufficient time to deliver for the diverse students that we have, in order for them to prepare the assignment and for us to also mark those assignments? And we also need to find out their prior knowledge, to find out what have been covered, because I'm sure almost all universities are the same. We started off and then we had to stop in the middle, and now we've just got to continue the balance that we have to complete the semester. So we need to find out whether how far are they from understanding what was taught before the MCO happened. And do we need to go over them again, or can we just continue? So these are the kind of situations or questions you need to find out in order for you to be able to design what to do next. In terms of the internet services, yeah, that's very crucial too, especially if you're planning to do it online. You need to find out really whether they have access to internet. I think if your students are located very near to the cities or towns or rural areas where there are landlines, they wouldn't have any problems. But if they are truly in a remote place, that could be one challenge. But then again, it's not that we can't solve that. And do we have a shared space? I mean, I'm sure all universities have their own learning management system. So can they reach that learning management system? Can they access to it from wherever they are? And if not, then we've got to start thinking about alternatives. So when you're doing all this checking to understand your learners before we actually design for them, we have to also understand that the reality check is redesigning lessons in times of crisis like now in a very short period of time, and you've just got to do it, can be daunting to some. So that's the reason why people have started sharing in like a learning community where people from within your institution or even outside of your institution are starting to share how we can go about doing it. So you don't have to take all of them, but at least take one or two that you feel comfortable before you start venturing into other ways of using, like different Web 2.0 tools, different modes of learning. So do what is feasible to you and work it step by step. And what is most important as an educator when we are teaching our students, we just constantly need to keep reminding ourselves, how can we help our students to achieve the learning outcomes? How can we make sure, no matter where they are, under what circumstances that they are in, they can still get it, achieve what was meant, the course learning outcomes that has been designed for the course. So looking back at those questions, there are possible situations here. There are students who have probably access to computer. So if they do have access, if they do have access to computers or laptops to complete their tasks and their assignments, that's well and good. The next thing is whether they have access to mobile. Can the students at least gain access to smartphones for the use of social media if internet is a problem? So if they can't use online, like now what we're doing, which is called synchronous mode of learning, if they can't do it this way, can they actually communicate with us via other social media, which they're very familiar with, like Telegram, WhatsApp, Instagram, FB online, what have you? So, do they have a phone at least that can be contacted immediately if they don't have a smartphone? Right, the next thing is actually to look at the internet, the strength of the internet, because that will determine the extent of online activities that can be used. And if all else, if you do not have any other things, then there's always other ways, which is if you can't contact them through the smartphone, you can contact them through the normal phone, that will be good enough. If they can't send you online materials, you can't send them online materials, that's fine, because there's always the postal delivery. So there are other means if online is not an option. It's just a matter of whether we are actually seriously thinking about helping our students. So when you see the word no one size fits all, this time of crisis is actually, how shall I say, actually shows us that there's no way for us to be able to give one way of teaching to everybody when they come with different background. If they have access to computer, that's good to have, but not necessarily everybody has, especially the first semester students. So if you're teaching the first semester students, you've got to make sure that you know, or you find out whether they do have access to computer or not. And some of them, because of their background, they might not even have a computer at home. So that's the reason why they sometimes prefer to stay on campus, because there are lots of alternatives that they can have access to in order to complete their course or program. So those who have a computer, they can do their assignment, they can have spelling checkers, they can use features in the software for better presentation. So that's fine. And people who have access to mobile data, this is the most common. I think they can go without the computer, but I don't think they can go without the handphones. Because I've been taking care of the students when I was the principal of a residential college. They don't mind eating one loaf of bread for a month as long as they can have their handphone. So that would be most common. And if they are staying somewhere in the cities or towns or in the rural, because of using the mobile data, they might not have enough data to actually do a lot of synchronous mode of learning. So then you have to create your balance of your syllabus into a modular form. Where you can do asynchronous activities, which means if they can gain access to the LMS, which in UUM we call it UUM Online, and I'm sure in different universities you will call it different things, but they're basically the learning management system. So you can actually provide all the instruction and all the notes and all the tasks and how it's going to be assessed via online, and then they go off and do and you give them time, and then they go off and do it offline, and then they can submit to you online again, and you can actually use software like Turnitin if it's an essay, so you can actually use Turnitin so just to check their for their plagiarism and all that. But if you decide to do synchronous, then you have to be considerate. What I mean by considerate is you might be teaching just one or two courses, and that's fine when you're even if you're using mobile data to do the synchronous learning, like what I'm doing right now. However, if your students are taking at least 7 courses and all the lecturers are actually using synchronous learning, and if lecturers fail to understand that the students have limited mobile data or coverage, they're going to have a problem, because buffering will happen or they will be disconnected, and in the end they will not be able to continue to gain anything from the synchronous lesson. So if in that situation, for people who have access to mobile data, it's best that you limit your synchronous learning into not more than 30 minutes, and make sure that you're using just-in-time teaching. Meaning, if you notice after doing the asynchronous activities that there are misconceptions, they don't understand certain things, and you think that it's a common misconception, almost everybody in the classroom has the same problem, then you can have your synchronous learning to tackle just that particular section where the misconception is. So you don't have to repeat yourself things that they have already understood. In a face-to-face arena or environment, you have the luxury to actually bore them with things that they have already understood and things that they want to know more. If you still decide to do lecture based, but if you're using student-centered learning, you are going to help them, and you are going to also help yourself to understand what they know and what they don't know, and you can just tease out things that they're not sure of in order for them to for you to get to ensure that learning has taken place, that they have understood. Now, for the most advantaged are those with strong internet. Mostly these students will be in the cities, they're in the towns. Even if they're in the rural areas, they have landline. And because of that, doing synchronous learning is not a big deal. So you can actually follow your weekly schedule in your scheme of work, because you don't have to redesign your scheme of work, since if all of your students have that characteristics. So you can do the synchronous mode of learning like that. And you can use all sorts of online tools, which is very, very interesting and very, very engaging, and you can even use online assessment. That's really going to make them feel really engaging through in their virtual learning. On the other hand, for those who are in the most disadvantaged categories are those who have no access. Not only they have no access to computer, they might not even have access to mobile data, or and because of that, they don't also have access to internet. Now, these students might be coming from very remote places, and that's fine, because all you need to do is just go back to basic, because you can't possibly use your weekly schedule unless you are willing to go to the post office every now and then. So what you have to do is also to design it into a modular base, and it's got to be the printed material form. But if you are very eco-friendly and you don't want to print anything, then you can actually download everything, including your video, your own presentation, your video recorded presentation of the topics, put it down, upload it into the pen drive, and send that pen drive to them. However, if they don't have a computer, then the only way that they can actually survive, if they have to continue or do their work from home, then the only option left will be for them to actually write with their own handwriting. So that's fine. So you just need to accept all that. Those are the possibilities under the circumstances. So there's always the postage delivery. So that's fine too. So if we are then moving on to process and product, basically when we look at or designing the assessment, or even the delivery, the assessment, the foundation is actually the constructive alignment. So basically you need to understand what's the learning outcome. You need to know what are the topics that's related to the top learning outcome. What are the activities that will be suitable in line with the learning outcomes, and what will be the right summative assessment that will help you to show or to have evidence that learning has taken place. So let's go one by one. Learning outcomes. So the questions that you would probably want to ask would be, what are the learning outcomes involved? What are the topics that are related to the learning outcomes? How many hours are spent on the learning outcomes per week? How many weeks that's needed to be for you to redesign in view of the crisis? So the reason why you're asking all these questions, because you need now to look at the weightage of the cross learning outcome. That's number one. Number two is actually to understand how much time or what kind of tasks that will be suitable because of the nature of the topics and the design in terms of the week. And so looking at when I say look at the topics in relation to the learning outcome, so you probably have 2 or 3 topics that's related to the course learning outcome. If you look at your syllabus, it's going to be like that. So what we are talking about here is actually looking at the topics and understanding learning outcomes. You now have to be creative in thinking what kind of activities that will actually activate those verbs. So if it's explain, it's not you explaining. What kind of activities, interesting activities, meaningful activities that allows your students to explain. So if you have students who have access to good internet, then you can actually help get them to do using all kinds of Web 2.0 tools in order for them to start explaining using tools like mind map or concept maps for them to actually use to do the explanation. So those are the kind of activities that you need to understand. You need to start thinking and look at the topics not as single topics, but combine in order to fulfill that course learning outcome. And when we're talking about learning activities, what we are dealing here is how do we ensure that our students are actually engaging in the activities? What are the evidence? What are the clues? The assurance of learning. So usually during the learning activities, we will provide to them formative assessment. So formative assessment is similar like the task that you require probably in your in the final assignment, but maybe it's done in chunks so that they will understand what is needed, so that they get feedback, they understand what needs to be done. So if they have a go at explaining, so you're not you're giving them feedback about how well they have explained, or you're giving them feedback about how they can actually improve on their presentation. So if you're asking them to present, so the formative feedback, it does not give any scores, but merely to help the students to improve their learning. However, on the other hand, summative assessment is the one that you will allocate percentage that will give the total of 100% to the students to measure their performance. So this is what counts in terms of students' performance. So when you're giving a formative assessment, that's just to give them feedback, just to give them some guidance about what it is all about. But when it's summative assessment, that's when you actually give them the score. And you don't have to wait for it to be given at the end. You can actually spread the assignments throughout the semester. And I'm sure everybody has been doing that anyway. So next is for us to look at, okay, before I begin, so there are some questions here. Due to, well, Prof. Karim is asking everybody, due to issues of academic integrity and reliability, do you think we should do without having the summative exam, final exam, or reduce the high-stake exam to low-stake exam? Well, this is it. We often think that summative assessment is just the final exam. Well, it is one of the summative assessment. But the summative assessment can be in the form of projects, it can be in the form of portfolio, it can be in the form of a case study, it can be in the form of activities, creative activities, and all this can be considered as summative assessment. So if your course is designed in such a manner that there is a final exam, then because of this situation, we probably have to consider whether are we going to allow our students to come back? Can they come back at the moment, at this point of time? And if they do, is it going to be putting them in a difficult situation, whatever. So all these issues have got to be also considered before we make that decision. So it all depends on the university. So some universities actually insist on the final exam, so they will have students coming back to do their normal exam-oriented assessment. But there are some universities that actually have considered, well, if they can't do the assessment in that manner, perhaps we can start thinking about alternative assessments, as I mentioned just now, like projects and what have you. So if you consider the high-stake exam as the paper pencil test and the low-stake exam as your project, which low stake in the sense that there will be people who think that the exam, the paper pencil test will be more reliable and more valid compared to the project. Well, in any case, both will have problems if you don't have the right instruction, if those instructions do not align to the course learning outcome, and both equally can be of good quality. If you're doing alternative assessment, you would need tools, good tools for you to measure. And in order for you to do that, then we will continue with this session, which is actually about designing lessons for alternative assessment, ensuring assurance of learning and achieving learning outcomes. So I'll get back to what will be the measuring tools that we're talking about here. Right, this is just an example of what this is an example of what my thoughts on modular-based approach to in this period of time. And this is actually if you're designing for online delivery, which means for students which are in the category of 1, 2, and 3. And what I mean by 1, 2, and 3 is 1 will be the one who have access to computer, 2 will be the one who's using mobile data, and 3 are the ones who have strong internet access. So you can actually do all sorts of online delivery. There are lots of Web 2.0 tools that you can actually do. I'm just giving an example. If your the first course learning outcome is actually to explain, and the soft skill, the cluster, now they call it the cluster. So if the soft skill related to it is actually communication, then what you want them is to be able to explain either verbally or in written form, because the communication is there. So you're going to actually measure their ability to explain and their ability to communicate. So the question now is to explain what, to communicate how. So that's where the topics is actually important, because you want to know what are the topics that's actually covered for the course learning outcomes. So I'm giving an example. Let's just say topic 1 and topic 2 is actually related to course learning outcome. Then you are actually, you've got to understand the context of topic 1 and understand the context of topic 2 so that you can start now thinking about creative activities for your students to do. So the Web 2.0 tools are many, and I'm just giving you tip of the iceberg, the most common that is used, and I'm sure there are many more. And if you actually also look at what Prof Karim is sharing every now and then, you will know that there is just so much out there for you to learn. So what you want to do is you can ask them questions, or you can develop questions for your students for them to have a go at answering them and explaining to you. And upon getting their explanation, so this can be done asynchronous. So upon getting their explanation, you can actually look at how well they have. What was that? Okay, let me continue. You can actually look at how they have responded, and then from there you will know what part that you need to pay attention to. So that's where you design your synchronous delivery. So that, as I said just now, this is what we call just in time. It's in time for them to understand in order for them to move on for the next course learning outcome. Right. In the second course learning outcome, let's just say you've got analyze, and there are about 4 topics that's related to it, and the critical thinking and problem solving is the soft skill that's related. So if you're teaching social science, you can actually give them a movie and ask them to actually, and this can be actually downloaded from the YouTube, or they can actually watch it through the YouTube, and then you can ask them to analyze. Or if you're actually teaching subjects that are of numeracy based, you can even give them a chart or details, or you can even give them case of the, what kind of statistics of recurrence and or statistics of death or whatever that's related to COVID-19 pandemic statistics, so that they can study the case and they can actually analyze. So there are lots of things that you can actually do. In fact, if let's just say you still want to do similar things like this and your students do not have access to online, you can actually ask them to watch television, I'm assuming they have got TV at home. So if they don't have Astro, at least they've got TV1 and TV2. So they can actually watch the news or get information from all sorts of documentaries about COVID-19, and they can still use those as the resources for them to do the analysis. Of course, that requires the lecturers to also watch the news so that you know whether those information will be there. And the other example is the course learning outcome, the third course learning outcome. If it's design and the soft skill related to it is leadership, then and a few topics that's actually related to it, you can actually give them a project that they can actually design. So you can show them the ability to justify their action, and you can actually show how they plan and execute the project until its success completion. So if you're from people from the education, you can actually ask them to prepare or design an interactive online lesson. If you're from the design faculty, that you can actually
Allah telah menghalalkan jual beli dan
okay, what was that all about? Can you please mute yourself if you're not speaking? And I'm sure this is not a training on halal jual beli. Let me continue. Right. If you're from the design program, you can actually design ergonomic chairs at home, because I have friends who's actually complaining they want to go back to their office and kiss their chairs because at home they don't have the right chairs to do work. And people from the engineering, they can actually look at what they observe in the news, and they can design prototypes of all sorts of things to help. So these are example of activities that are meaningful to them, and also related to what they need to know. Yeah. Well, the theory that they have understood to how it is actually used in real life situations. Now, in this slide is for me to show you the generic elements of alternative assessment. So alternative assessment is actually very, very relevant if you want to look at performance-based. So you can actually, if you want to do simulation, so you can do simulation projects. Of course, exhibition is a no-no now because they can't go out. But if you're creative enough, they can actually do a little exhibition in their own room and show it to you, and you know what kind of exhibits that they have in order to perhaps engage their family members to learn something. I don't know. So you know, they can be creative too. So so exhibition can be considered relevant too, except that you can't go to the real exhibition. Role play, definitely. I'm sure you've seen lots of TikToks here and there about how their lives after during the MCO period. So if they can do it, I'm sure our students can also do it, and they can actually do role play for certain course learning outcomes related, especially for language, for actually for anything, but definitely for language. Drama, poetry, songs. I mean, if you're teaching even food technology, you can actually ask them to create songs if you to help them to explain things. So instead of explaining the normal way, they can actually explain through songs. And there's also demonstration and experiment. And if you are actually teaching people in the hotel and catering, so you want to teach them about certain dish that they need to do, so they can't be in your cooking lab, but they definitely can do it in their kitchen. So that's also another alternative. So the another thing that you can consider is the authenticity of the assessment. The closer it is to the real world and the ability for you to connect to the community and industry, the better. And of course, in ideal situation, this is where the service learning comes in, where you can actually ask your students to actually go to the community. However, in this MCO period, that's very unlikely. But they do have their own community in their own house, which they can do a lot of things too. And sometimes little projects like service learning at home can also transform not only the student but also the family members. So that's also one thing that you can actually consider. Right. The most famous alternative assessment is the portfolio, the use of portfolio. And in this situation where students can actually submit via online, that will be what we call Eportfolio, where the students can actually collect student sample works, they can do reflection, they can include documents that they have that's related to their work, and they are able to show the learning process that they have gone through. Writing samples instead of asking them the normal essay that you have, you can actually ask them to write for a newsletter or write for a bulletin, a journal, a newspaper article, learning blogs, other than the report and the proposal, of course. And what is needed here when you're doing alternative assessment is that the problem has got to be open-ended in nature. The question has got to be open-ended in nature. There's no one fixed answer, because if there's only one fixed answer, then there's no point of you doing alternative assessment. You may as well do the paper pencil test, because there's only one answer. But if you decide to do alternative assessment, it has to allow for various ways of solving the problems. And that's how the world works anyway. We don't have just one way of solving the problems. I mean, look at the news about people saying that they can actually solve the they have got the panacea to solve the coronavirus. So different people are giving different all sorts of ways to solve to curb the virus. So from that alone gives you an idea that alternative assessment allows that it gives room for people to actually provide what they think is the best solution in their context. And never forget that you don't have to be the only person who's giving the feedback. Your students themselves can be taught to be to have the accountability and responsibility to evaluate themselves, which means they learn how to see where they were and what they need to do in order for them to move on. So this is what we call self-regulated learning, and it's very important. People who have self-regulated learning, or if you encourage them to have self-regulated learning, it helps them to understand and become confident in their work, and they usually become better learners. So self-assessment is actually also good. It can be a formative assessment. You don't have to have it as a summative assessment, but having it on is crucial to allow or to educate your learners to become independent, to become responsible, and above all, to become trustworthy. And their friends can also give feedback to their work too. And believe me, friends who are critical about your work are the real friends. The one who says that everything is fine and everything is good. Well, you got to be careful because people who actually tells you, yeah, you're okay here, but perhaps if you do this, it will be better. Those are really, really good friends. We call them critical friends. So what are the key elements that you can or you need to consider when you are doing alternative assessment? The issue of fairness and reliable and validity, whether you do the normal paper pencil test or alternative assessment, that goes without saying. The issue of fairness has got to be there. The questions must be reliable. The questions must, the problem or the question or the task must be valid as well. And in this situation, in times of crisis, it's the least advantaged context that you need to consider. Because in terms of delivery, you can actually deliver according to your students. And you can provide them with all the resources. But when it comes to assessment, everyone must have the same assessment. What I'm trying to say here is, I'm giving an example. If, let's just say in your class, and you're very lucky to have 10 people in your classroom, 2 of your students do not have access to internet, therefore, online assessment is not shouldn't be your choice. You have to use an assessment that it doesn't matter where they are and what form or where they are and whatever it is, they can still deliver the same kind of given the same kind of question or assignment or task, and they can actually deliver based on that. So perhaps to do projects would be better. Even if they submit to you the project via online or the project via postal delivery, it's still a project that they have done. So that's what I mean by you got to have the issue of fairness has got to be taken care of. And of course, when you're using alternative assessment, as I said before, it has to relate to the real world. So you can't ask questions like, give me 5 factors of whatever. You have to relate to their context. The closer it is to their context, the closer it is to the real world, the more challenging it is to them, and the least chances for them to actually get the answers from the internet. So relating it to the real world and making it authentic is crucial. And it's also good because you're actually connecting the theory to practice. It's not just about memorizing and regurgitating information. You are now asking them to see the connection between what they have learned and how they can actually use their knowledge in the world out there. And that is actually what learning is all about. Understanding what you have learned and understanding how you can use that in your own context. And you have to allow the kind of questions that you ask, it's got to be, they allow students to have creative solutions, which means there are many ways for them to solve the problems. And this is interesting because how they solve the problem will actually reflect their individual differences and their circumstances and their context. So that's where the fairness will be there. You know, you are allowing them to become creative, allowing them to tell you what they know and how they solve in their own context. So if you just want one way solution, then forget about alternative assessment. You may as well ask them to come back and sit for the exam. because you've got, if it's a one-way solution, you've got your answer key already. But for a multiple solution, it's not the solution that you're looking at, it's the skills that they derive in order to come to the solution that you are actually focused on. And the beauty of alternative assessment is it allows for collaborative learning. Again, collaborative learning mirrors workplace situation. If you want them to tell you what they have learned in terms of memorization, of course, it's not suitable for collaborative learning, and it's not suitable either for alternative assessment, as I mentioned before. But for alternative assessment, if you want to measure teamwork, which you can't measure in a paper pencil test, but you can measure in the alternative assessment when you ask them to work on a task through Google Doc, for example. So the skills like teamwork, leadership, ethics, they all can be measured, and actually it mirrors the workplace situation anyway. When they learn to work with each other, it's when they don't know how to work with each other that's the problem. And of course, as I mentioned just now, the formative assessment. Let me go to the formative assessment first. So in alternative assessment, not only you concentrate on the summative assessment, which is actually giving them the score at the end, but you're allowing a lot of chances or options or opportunities for students to get feedback from various people, from various, it can be from themselves, from their peers. If just now, if I say, even if they are doing a project which involves their family as part of the community, they're actually getting feedback from their family, which they can document it in the portfolio. Or if when everything is fine later on, when they're actually doing service learning, they can get the feedback from the community. So the feedback that they're getting is actually essential for their own personal growth. That's when they see the trajectory of learning, how those experiences actually helps them to see other people's perspective rather than what they thought initially was enough. And of course, whether it is in a classroom, face-to-face environment, or online or remote, immediate feedback is very essential. Because if you let your students just wait after they have asked you the question, that's just not going to be good, because it will make their momentum become lower. Right. The thing that I wanted to say about validity and reliability when it comes to alternative assessment is where you have a good rubric. So using the rubric and making sure that you understand what are the criteria that's related to the learning outcomes. Remember I said, whether you do your delivery or you do your assessment, and even when you're doing your marking, you've got to make sure that it is actually aligned to the course learning outcome. It has got to be the mantra of the day. Rubric without the learning outcomes, you can have a tool, but that tool will not be measuring what is intended. So having the right rubric, that's the reason why sometimes people say, can I just get the rubric from the internet? Well, if you're teaching language and it's pretty much generic kind of language, that's fine. Maybe. Even then, I have my reservation. But if you're teaching a specific course which has a specific course learning outcome at a specific level for a specific context, which is actually related to your topics, then you have to develop your own rubric. So you've got to understand what is the learning outcomes. Those are the criteria. What is the learning outcomes? What are the criteria in the tasks that are given in view of the topics just now? Those are all considerations that you need to do when you're developing your rubric. So these are the great steps when you are doing the alternative assessment. First, you identify the learning outcomes. You look at your syllabus and your scheme of work. You take note of the learning outcomes, and including the soft skills, learning domain, clusters. And then you start thinking of interesting alternative ways to assess. So you got to be creative and never forget the learning outcomes. And then you start thinking of the most disadvantaged. You need to see who are your students in your classroom, because you've got to make sure that it is fair. The assessment has got to be fair and has been considered to cater the most disadvantaged situation. And then you start looking at the instruction. Now, this is the crucial bit. This is the important bit. Because, as I said just now, whether it is in a paper pencil test or in a project, where if you do not have the right instruction, you can have the project, you can have the exam questions, but they're in both situations you're not measuring what you're supposed to measure. So you need to make sure that the stimulus, if you have one, and the STEM, which is basically part of the instruction, is clear and is related to the learning outcome. So it's and it has the element of authenticity for the students. So that means it's not too clear cut. Authenticity here means they are able to think, and at the same time they can relate to the context, which is actually helping them to improve on their soft skill. And of course, begin with the end in mind actually talks about, or maybe what I'm referring here to when I say begin with the end in mind is when you start doing your question, you have to already start thinking about your answer key. Meaning, if you are thinking about doing a case study, you've got to start thinking, how are you going to measure that case study? So the rubric has got to be designed as you design the project. So when you are giving the students the project, you have already given them you give them along with the rubric so that they know what your standard is. So in a normal paper pencil test, you will have the marking scheme or the answer key. But for alternative assessment, you probably have rubric. Usually, the most there are many ways, but the most common one will be the rubric or the checklist. So when you're talking about the rubric, it can be an analytical kind of rubric, and it can be holistic kind of rubric. And finally, the reliability and validity, as I mentioned before. So if you have more than one person marking, or and this particular course has like 3 or 4 people, more than one people actually teaching, then the issue on inter-rater reliability must be addressed. Meaning there must be a norming session where you sit down to discuss not only the project, the instruction for the project, the rubric for the project or the measuring tool that you have designed for the project. And upon getting your students' assignment, you need to sit down and start having a norming session in order for you to be able to do moderation, so that everybody will know the kind of standard that we are talking about here, so that everybody is clear what is an A and what is a B, and so on and so forth. So in terms of issues and challenges, well, as the famous saying says, the only thing that is constant is change. So you can't deny that change is inevitable. I wanted to do a poll today, but maybe I shall let me see whether I can do this or not. Yeah, hang on a minute. Well, okay, maybe I'm gonna ask Dr. Izwan to unmute everybody now, because I wanted to do the poll, but I'm still learning how to use this WebEx thingy. But okay, if these are the options of time, readiness, infrastructure, and creativity, if you can use your chat, perhaps, which of these would be your barrier? Okay, so infrastructure is going to be something that our staff and our university has got to work on it, because it has both sides, not only the infrastructure on our end as the lecturer, but also the infrastructure that is there for the students. So I have I have the information that the Ministry of Higher Education is very serious about this, and they've been talking to people, the internet service providers, understanding the context in which students who are staying in certain areas, or even lecturers staying in certain areas, will not have good access of internet. So that will be one thing that we can actually work on together with the respective people, the university, the internet service providers, the government, and so on and so forth. So how do we deal with this? If it's time, I can see that time is not an issue, which means everybody is clear and they're ready to go about it. So I'm not going to talk about that that much. In terms of lecturers' readiness and student readiness, it's not that critical. So it's the infrastructure that's actually very critical. So in terms of lecturers' readiness, having the positive learning community within your university and outside of your institution will help you to continuously develop. Like I'm actually learning. You can see that what's happening just now. Students as well, they need to have proper instructions and guidance. And I think the institution IT centers and the teaching learning centers in respective universities are also helping to give proper guidelines for the students, proper instruction, so that students won't feel left behind. And of course, misconception. There are some that they think that you have to start and make sure that everybody is not left behind, which is true. But you also need to understand the context in which the students are in order for you to decide when exactly and how exactly it can be done. And having the critical thinking and creative thinking is also important. Having a positive mind, healthy body gives you the creative brain in order for you to be able to read, in order for you to be able to listen, observe. And from there, you will know what you need to do for your students, especially if you have your students in your heart. So let's give another try. This is planning for successful alternative assessment. So I'm giving you an example of how your learning outcomes, how you can actually map or make yourself understand what needs to be done. So in terms of the course learning outcome and the skills, you have to identify them, and then you need to understand that you need to activate those verbs. So you have to have lots of student activities. And when you are providing the feedback, so you have to make sure that there is enough formative feedback. So I put that as not counted. So not counted means it's just feedback for the students to understand whether they have got it or not. But the summative assessment is the one that will determine their results or their performance. So how do you ensure or determine the weight or the percentage of each of the course learning outcome? Well, it depends on how much time you spend on those course learning outcomes. So this one, you can actually look at the syllabus as well as your original scheme of work. So basically what it means is the number of hours spent on the course learning outcome over the total hours spent for teaching. So if in a face-to-face teaching for one semester for that particular course, you will need 42 hours. So how much time did you spend for that course learning outcome? And remember the previous slides, every course learning outcome has the topics that's actually connected to it. So that means that 5 hours is actually connected to those topics. So perhaps you want to give them a quiz if you think that will suffice for 10%. But you can also give them in the form of projects or little tasks, which you can use checklists or even rubrics. So having understood how much time you have spent will give you the indicator to the weight of the assignment or the assessment. And all this percentage, when it totals up, it will give you the 100%. I've got one question here. Is the summative assessment calculation applicable for online teaching as now reduced total hours? In fact, I wouldn't say the teaching is reduced total hours. You probably would be doing a lot of teaching, but you probably will do a lot of channels, not necessarily using your online, but it could be using your WhatsApp. You're still teaching. It could be that you are actually, so yeah. So it's the online teaching is probably reduced for 30 minutes, but they have, when they are actually doing their work and you're giving them feedback, it's still teaching. So don't forget that. It's just that you don't have the pleasure of having a 1.5 hours or 3 hours in a week with your students, but you're still teaching when they're asking you questions and you're giving them feedback and so on and so forth. Okay, this is an example of how I did it for mine. I hope it's helpful for everybody. But okay, this is a course learning outcome from a course on social culture theory. So this is actually the course learning outcome. So I'm just giving you one of the course learning outcome as an example. So as I mentioned just now, one course learning outcome probably will have topics that's actually related to it. So the two topics that's actually related to it is the introduction to social culture theory and Vygotsky's work. So these are two topics that's actually related to this particular course learning outcome. And the number of hours that was spent to teach these particular topics was 9 hours out of the 42 hours. So what I designed the activities that the students need to do was, apart from giving them the reading materials and guiding questions, so there are guiding questions, you know, that I gave for the students to when they're actually doing the reading, because it's not the readings are very challenging as well. So the questions that's actually guiding them to understand the material. And so the example will be, what are the distinct differences between concept of scaffolding and mediation as gathered from your reading? How would you illustrate to concept novice and experts? These are all notions or concepts that's actually discussed in the theory. So I actually use it, I pose these questions via the UUM Online or the learning management system. And we also created forum for the students to actually discuss. So the forum is not just discussing between them and me, but also between their peers. And then that was just like a warm-up session. The other thing that I asked them to do was to watch parts of a movie, which I'm sure people have watched this movie before, Dead Poet Society. They can get it from the YouTube, and there were sections in the YouTube that I wanted my students to actually watch it, and they have to identify concepts of social culture theory. Now, Dead Poet Society was not designed for the theory, but when I watched that movie, I realized that we can actually use it as a case study. So I call this movie case study. So they were given the case. So why did the teacher decide to change his teaching method? What was the problem? How does his action help the students? Solve this in view of social culture theory. So they have to relate what they understand from the movie and relate that to the theory. So you can do this in groups of 3. So upon completing, you can exchange with other groups to get feedback. And I've also given them the rubric. Now, the rubric that I gave them was also the same rubric that I'm going to give them which is the same rubric that I'm going to use when I'm going to assess them during the summative assessment. So they're using that particular rubric, now giving feedback and evaluating their peers. So, and because they come from they come from various background, not various background, various locations. They can actually still, if they've got good internet connection, they can actually collaborate via Google Doc, as I mentioned. So the group use Google Doc to prepare the analysis and the report. So they can actually work on one document together virtually. So what I asked them to do was not only I gave them feedback when they were discussing during the forum, their peers gave them feedback. So there were lectures feedback, peer assessment. And when they were doing the Date Poet Society, they were actually solving, they were asked to swap between the group, and they were asked to to assess their friends' work using the rubric. While they were doing that, when I asked them after they've completed, not only they gave feedback, but when I asked them, what have you learned from this lesson? They actually said, now we know where we did wrong. Because it's only when you are evaluating other people's work, you realize that, it's either you are getting you're getting it from the feedback from their group members, or while you're doing it, you're also thinking about your own work. So the group exchange their analysis and the reports, and they also learn from their mistakes. For the summative assessment, so the FA and the SA is not anybody's name. It's FA is formative assessment and SA is summative assessment. So again, it's still group work. So that's the reason why I gave them a formative group work, summative group work. So to give them the idea of what I'm doing, the group work is where I actually evaluate their soft skills, and ability for them to actually solve the problems is where I look at their knowledge. So this time, if during the formative assessment, I gave them parts of the movie. I didn't give them the whole movie, I just gave them parts of the movie. But this time, they have to watch a whole movie, which is entitled Hichki. I can't remember whether that's the right spelling or not, but it's a Hindi movie, and I actually watched it while I was traveling from Alostar, Kuala Lumpur, Alostar. That's the privilege of traveling in mass sometimes when we're in the big airplanes. So I realized that was a really good movie with social cultural theory is just there in that movie, and I asked my students to actually watch it. And then they have to elect themselves a leader, and they have to divide sections of the movie. So that's where the teamwork comes in. And they have to analyze. So you're actually, while they are doing group, but because they are responsible for a certain section, so they have to really be doing it well, because their contribution does matter to the whole group. So for each section, they need to solve and explain using concepts of social culture theory and methods that the teacher used to change their students and provide their view for effective method and whether it is applicable in the Malaysian setting. So Hichki was a Hindi movie. The setting is actually in India. But I also asked them to start now looking back at what the movie is all about. How does that apply to our Malaysian context? Oh, really? Okay, Siti Hasna here told me that it's a Hindi movie, without the T. Okay, fine. So everybody go and search the Hichki movie, which is without the T, and enjoy yourself watching it. So my students really loved it. I mean, they are teachers, and when they watch that, they realize, if you have the guts to become a great teacher, nobody is going to stop you. Okay, so I'm just sharing with you the rubric that I created. So again, it's all related to these are the soft skills, these are the cognitive and the affective level, which is actually also all related to the course learning outcome and what I wanted from there, from the task. So the task and the course learning outcome and the criteria. So these are the standards, whether it's excellent or weak or okay. Norliza Kushari is actually sharing that she has actually used 3 idiots and again the dream part, and students applied critical thinking and they enjoyed it. Yes. So these are actually examples of how you can help students to do something in a fun way, but they're not just having fun. They're actually learning, and they are also reflecting. They are critically giving you their views and their reflection. And sometimes because of this, from time and time again, I do have students sending me good movies, and they will say, maybe you need to use this in your class, which I find it very, very helpful. So it's important actually to start thinking about helping your students to become reflective in nature. Okay, while waiting for the polling, Dr. Izwan, once it's ready, you let me know, okay? I'll just review some of the questions posted in the chat. Dr. Fauziah, how do we deal with the concern of trustworthiness of online assessment? This is a nagging issue. Prof. Karim's question, can you respond to this question? Okay, well, it all boils down to the kind of questions that you ask online. Why do you think mind map is not a good alternative assessment? It's not an alternative assessment to show to explain.
Dr. Fauziah, can I say?
Yes, please.
Okay. Because I just focused on the word explanation. So perhaps mind map is more about graphic representation of your understanding, and it does not give much opportunity to explain yourself in detail.
Okay.
But it can be, but for perhaps, when we are focused more on some points, not so much explanation.
Yeah. Well, what about portfolio? Thank you, Dr. Nikki. Portfolio, anyone else? Anyone who wants to give me their view on portfolio? Why do you think that that's not a good alternative assessment?
Fauziah, I think because a portfolio is a collection of what the students do. So there may be a lot of various submissions in there, but like the rest is the case study is like one thing, mind map. But portfolios contain a lot, so it's more of how we can see the student as a whole, not really, well, not exactly explaining, not me.
Okay, point taken. What about essay? Anyone who feels that essay is not a good alternative assessment to explain?
Fauziah?
Yes.
Karim here.
Yes, Prof.
I have a different opinion on the portfolio.
Okay, Prof.
Portfolio, I think, if well designed and if the students really understand and appreciate how they can actually design their portfolio, if we teach them how to curate content, so the skill of curation, you don't have to put everything in the portfolio, but rather they should be very selective as to what they want to put in the portfolio. And I think that the most useful part of portfolio is getting them to do a very deep reflection of what they have learned from each of the learning artifacts that they include in their portfolio. So I think that is where the assessment part can be done on the reflection part. But they need to be taught how to do it properly and meaningfully. Thanks.
Brilliant, Prof. That's true. That's very true. Okay, I'd like to find out someone who actually says that essay, open-ended questions, is not an alternative assessment. Well, as Prof. Karim mentioned, actually, even if you use mind map, there is an opportunity for you to provide avenues for students to explain. It does appear as if it's actually just, notes. But if you ask them to present based on their mind map, whether in writing or a verbal presentation, so there is also avenue for them to explain why they did their mind map that way. So they are explaining their thoughts. Actually, you are able to actually get the root of their thoughts when you are actually doing mind map. And in terms of portfolio, as Prof. Karim mentioned, and I concur, is that it all boils down to what you want them to do in your portfolio. If you're just asking them to put things, and wrap it up, then it defeats the purpose of having the portfolio. Then you can't actually see the learning progression of why they see that particular resources helpful for them. How does it help them to understand the context in which they are in? So the more in-depth they are able and the more reflective they are, they can actually do a very good explanation of the theory, of the concepts, and so on and so forth. However, if you are referring to essays, if you don't do the essay well, the essay can be a regurgitation of information. They can explain, but the soft skills that is not embedded will not be there. So that's why when even if you're using essay as a form of alternative assessment in the form of a project or whatever, remember not to remove the context in which they are in, so that it makes sense for them when they're doing the explanation. It's not just regurgitation of information. Okay, let's look at this case study. Now, if in your class, let's just say a class of 30, you did a survey and you found that out of the 30 students in your classroom, 28 have access to computer, and 18 of them have got access to mobile data, 10 of them have got strong internet, and 2 of them have no access to the computer, no access to internet. What are you going to do? So if you have a student in your classroom now, and let's just say, but let's just say, we've got to prolong this MCO, and finally all the other universities say, oh, we have got no way but to actually continue with this. How do we address these issues if we were to start delivering, because time is running?
Okay, this was my main question. I thought I'll ask at the end of this session was, I saw your slides in the beginning that this slide that we might have different kinds of students. The definition of diversity of student now changes in terms of the internet access they have. So that was going to be my question, and since you have asked, so right now, even though I have 6 students in one class, and out of those 6, 2 of them do not have a very strong connection. And so, of course, keeping the inclusion and student rights and equity access in mind, what I'm doing right now is planning my class and sharing the full class in written form to everybody, letting them know what are the topics we are going to be covering online, synchronous. And I'm also, of course, I have a lot of asynchronous activities. So for those who cannot come online or can't see the online classes, I record the session and I share it later on with them. So basically, I'll have a backup plan, like for both those who have good access and those who do not have good access. So I'm inclusive in my teaching. So that's
Okay, what about your assessment?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. So I had one quiz, although I have full 100% coursework for one course, but we had one quiz in it. Now I am negotiating with students. Would they like to do online quiz, or should we go for open-ended exam? So it depends if there's one boy who's trying to get a stronger connection. So if students are confident that they can go online quiz, we would go ahead. Otherwise, we will stick to open book test. Like I'm going to give them 2 questions because it's only 10%.
So which means the open book is actually for all your students, right?
Yes, open book, all the students, and I'll put it on Turnitin so that I can maintain integrity and all those trustworthiness issues. So Turnitin would be a good, and I am going to give them limited time. Like I'll open it for 2 hours only. So that way they would do their exam and they will upload the response.
Thank you, Dr. Nikki. That's what I mean. When you have, when we are talking about diverse learners before, when it's face-to-face, we are talking about different things. But when we're doing actually during the face-to-face, we could probably have the same problem, but because they are on campus, they have friends that can actually help them. So they do have that support system that can still, let them continue with their studies. However, in the situations in which they are at home, in their own context, with all the limitations that they have, so some of them can do it, but some of them will have a challenging task. But that doesn't mean you have to stick one way to teach everyone. So just like what Dr. Nikki did, you have to prepare based on your students. If you're doing it online for mobile data and internet, for example, you can actually help them to do the online. So since many of them are using mobile data, so more of the asynchronous activities compared to the synchronous activities. So that means you still can use tools. Of course, you've got to check with your students. I mean, maybe one or two online assessment like Mentimeter, the use of Mentimeter, the use of Poll Everywhere, the use of quizzes. Maybe one way of, you have got to try it out. If they can do it, then you can actually continue using it as a formative assessment, not as the summative assessment, because when you're using a summative assessment, you've got to make sure that everybody has enough time, the same amount of time and the same amount of, how shall I say, situation that they are in, yeah? So just like I would agree that the kind, if I were actually teaching, I would be doing the same thing. I will, since the majority will be those who can access internet, I will have to do online learning, but at the same time, I'm going to video record myself doing the online session so that my students who cannot access the internet, I can actually, this is where I said, remember I said about downloading everything into a pen drive and sending that pen drive to the students. So if they don't have internet access, then I have to call them. There is no other way but to actually call them. Usually you will not have many of those students who are like that in your classroom, but I'm not saying that you will not have at all. So yes, you've got to make sure that the different students are actually catered to in this sense. Not that they are taught in the same way, but they are taught according to their capabilities. So the mobile data students and the internet students, they can go together. Unless the whole class has got strong internet, then you're fine. You can actually do wonders. But if you do have students who have limited data and all that, then you've got to cater for them too. But you can still use the online learning. It's just that when you are dealing with one or two students in your classroom with no access, it doesn't mean that you're not giving them anything. It just means that you now have to start thinking about doing the printed modules, as I mentioned just now. If they don't have access to internet, then it's got to be printed. You probably have to show captions of what the questions that the students were asking you in the forum, so that the students who do not have access do not feel left behind in those situations. But only put what is relevant. You don't have to put everything, because then they will have cognitive overload, too much information. So you just give them information that is crucial for them to understand and to be able to meet the learning outcome. That is the big thing. So while I am actually discussing about this, I'm also looking at what questions that have been raised, what was the answer to the poll. That poll is not, there's no one way answer, right? The poll is actually for you to think. If, of course, as I mentioned, if the essay is done for you to just ask them to explain 5 elements in whatever, then that's not alternative assessment. That is basically you're expecting one kind of answer. But if you're expecting various solution where you say list down the 5 elements. How does these elements actually relate to the context based on whatever? That's where the essay can be turned into a possible alternative assessment in the form of a project, in form of learning blogs or newsletters, whatever, which I have mentioned to you earlier. So I think we don't have to deal with that because Dr. Nikki has actually helped us with that, with her explanation. But this can be a takeaway for you to go, well, if you have this kind of verbs, but of course it will be best for you to now design your own, for your own course. So this is an example of the course learning outcome, which is 10%, 20%, course learning outcome 2 is 20%, course learning outcome 3 is 30%, and course learning outcome 4 is 40%. So in total it's 100%. So assuming that in the beginning of the semester, you've already done the quiz because everybody was around, so you can actually give them the quiz, and you've got that 10% already. Then the MCO happened, and you're not able to do it. So you can actually now start thinking, how can I develop based on the students that I have. So you understand now what kind of situations and what kind of considerations that you need to do for your students, for you to be able to start thinking about what kind of assessment that would be suitable to measure the ability for them to apply, to measure the ability for them to analyze, and measure the ability to design. And remember, you have to design your own rubric based on the task that you have given, because the task will be related to the topics, related to the context in which you have asked them to address, and it's related to the course learning outcome, which was actually designed for your course, not designed for other people's course. So that's why understanding the criteria and understanding your learning outcome is crucial. So, can this be done? Well, Benjamin Franklin said, if you fail to plan, you are planning to fail. So if you sit back and relax and just wait for things to come normal, I'm not sure whether that's just going to be normal, as normal can be within these few months. But if you start planning and doing things, especially if you're teaching undergraduate, because I know postgraduate classes are almost to the end, but for the undergraduate, there's still a long way to go. So let's just take April for you to understand your learners, and then from April until, give yourself until early May, for you to be really confident in actually have the confidence to actually use the technology and understand your own context. You know, if you don't have, if you can't do certain things, you need to find help, like what I'm doing right now. Without Dr. Izwan and Dr. Shah's help, I don't think I can do this. So doing the online training with the help of others and getting it through, and of course with Allah's help as well. All this you've got to give yourself time for all this, because we are human after all. So we need time to actually give ourselves that encouragement and the space to learn. And then while we're doing that, we can actually start thinking about what would be the right formative assessment. How can I help my students to understand, even if they're miles away from me? What kind of summative assessment can I do? Well, how difficult is it? How much time do they need in order to do a certain project? Well, the time will depend on the complexity of the task given. And then time for you to assess as well, because I know if we were doing it with the MCQ way or the short answer, you can actually mark your scripts faster than if you were to read the reports, especially if you're teaching a large class. So you've got to have to be feasible and you've got to be realistic as well, the time frame, because if you're too tired, that's not good as well. Because as I said, remember the issue of fairness. So if you're tired and you have fatigue, you got to break and then you got to relax and come back and do the marking again. Finally, don't forget to do the CQI. That's the continuous quality improvement. Because if you don't reflect, a teacher who doesn't reflect will continue to do the same mistakes again and again and again until they retire. And that is a catastrophe to their students. So basically, continuous quality improvement is about the teacher reflecting to see whether have I done what I can possibly do in order to help my students to achieve the learning outcomes. If I didn't do it well, where did I do wrong? How can I improve? And no one is perfect. Everybody, if you learn from your failures, then your learning trajectory will be big. But if you feel that you're perfect and you think that you don't have to learn when you just know just a bit, then it's not going to be good for you and above all for your students. So to wrap things up, we can do this. We can only do this if we think we can. So keep calm, everyone, and carry on educating because we are important. If we fail to do our task and we use this situation as an excuse, then we will fail to create leaders who are able to adapt to this volatile world. So you've got to make sure that you remain connected with your students. You have to make sure that it doesn't matter where they are and what condition that they are in, you are going to be there to help them to learn. And understandably, you can't rely on your scheme of work unless you have that ideal setting where all your students have good internet access and you can actually follow your weekly scheme of work. So you need time to redesign the task. Yes, I know it is a daunting task, but we have to do nevertheless. And we have friends if we ever need them. That's important. And of course, we've got to be creative. If you feel that this is not a good situation, this is bad, you will end up becoming lecturers who's going to ask the students to just drop the course and take it when it's fine. That's not going to be helpful for your students. So you need to make sure that you walk the talk. If you want to do alternative assessment, and you believe that alternative assessment can make everybody develop well, to become a better people, then to make sense of what they have learned and apply that in their real world context, then what you are doing is right. So in life, there are many solutions to one problem. Flexible education creates for diverse solutions. What you are doing is you're catering to diverse learners and therefore you are thinking about diverse solutions. As long as your students meet the course learning outcomes, you're bound to do it right. So stay safe, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Izwan. Thank you, everybody, for being participative in this session and making this a very, very great session for me too, because this is my first time doing online. And I'm getting the hang of it, and that's nice.
Fauziah, you want to open for Q&A?
Oh, can. Yes, any Q&A.
Assalamualaikum, Prof. Fauziah.
Thank you. Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Prof, I would like to ask, are we, UUM lecturers, are we allowed to use other assessment tools outside our UMOL system? Like other quizzes, like quizzes and etc. Those assessment tools that are not provided under UUMOL.
You can for formative assessment, yes. For formative assessment, not for summative assessment.
But would there be any consequences? Because we use these tools, would there be any consequences during the audit later?
That's what I'm saying. When you want to use quizzes, Kahoot, Poll Everywhere, Mentimeter, all these Web 2.0 tools, It's best that you use them for formative assessment.
Okay.
Formative assessment means you're not counting that in their 100%. Not counting.
So not included in the syllabus, you mean? The marks?
No, it's not syllabus. No, it's not part of the 100% marks. Yeah.
Marks, yeah. Or it shouldn't be part of it.
Yeah.
Then.
For example, if let's just say the students do the presentation, I can still use the same rubric that I'm going to use for the summative, which they will present. But this time I'll give them a score. I'll just say that I'll give them the score, but that score has got nothing to do with their performance. So when I ask them to do again after they have done their they've got their feedback, then you can actually use that as the summative. So coming back to your question about using Mentimeter, the problem is because as you say, it's an outside source. And best is actually for you to use the LMS, because then it's a lot easier, because you will know who is the one taking the exam.
Exactly. Yeah. Because we have the records of the students and so on.
But having said that, some schools, they have actually done all sorts of various ways. They can even have the students' picture doing the attempting the question as the registration.
I got it.
Yeah. So, but that's cumbersome. So, best is for you to use the LMS.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, thank you, Prof. Thank you
No
very
problem.
much.
No problem. Dr. Izwan, I'll just be around until you switch off, okay?
Okay. We wait until everyone left the room.
Okay.
So now we have 141, 48 decreasing.
Okay. I'll stay here. I'm not going anywhere. I've got to stay at home anyway.
Dr. Fauziah, thank you very much. Chandra here.
Yes, Chandra. I hope
Thank
it's
you very much. Now I have to think, how am I going to get this into the entrepreneurship program? We'll see how.
Can entrepreneurship lagi lah, banyak all sorts of ways that you can actually do, lots of interesting ways.
Yeah, it's some mind-opening thing lah. Thank you very much for the sharing.
No problem.
Right.
Pleasure. It's a pleasure.
Yeah.
Dr. Fauziah, this is Siti Hasna from UMS. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Okay,
thank you. Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Wah, jauh tu.
Aziz here, RMC.
Yes.
Lepas ni buat session untuk research pula.
Research? Okay.
Can share with them for them to do research on. I mean, during this MCO, no, I do afraid that unable to proceed with our. Yeah, so tu dah.
Itulah, I understand.
Yeah, I'm thinking of doing something online. Tak tahu macam mana. So I think your session is very very good, and I think if we can share something with our researchers tu, taklah. Hopefully nak invite you nanti je.
Boleh, insyaAllah.
Thank you ya.
Yeah, thank you. My pleasure.
Prof.
Yes. Yeah.
Niza from SBM nak tanya, kalau kita buat MCO online ni kan, nanti audit nanti macam mana
MCO online?
Tak, maksudnya dalam kita buat online learning ni kan. So nanti audit nanti macam mana for this semester?
Itulah I tak faham audit you tu macam mana, because semua orang semua orang kena duduk dekat dalam rumah kan?
Yeah.
Jadi semua orang memang tak dibenarkan balik ke kampus untuk buat untuk belajar, right?
Betul.
Tapi orang masih kena belajar.
Betul.
So cakap kat audit tu macam tu.
Okay. Alright. Thank you, Prof.
No problem.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hello, I just want to say thank you so much for the session.
Thank you. I hope it's actually helpful.
Yes, very. It's just that I'm still figuring out how to kadang-kadang sebab trying to figure out where things are in this WebEx thing. But yeah, thank you so much for the session. Yeah, it's very very helpful. Yeah.
Alhamdulillah.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Hi, Prof. Welcome.
Hi. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi.
Thank you very much for the inspiring session.
Well, next time you can do it too.
Inshallah.
Okay. Alhamdulillah.
Masuk dalam ni, nak masak.
Okay. Salam Jumaat, everybody. Yes.
Yeah, Dr. Fauziah, I'm Mazida from UKM.
Yes.
Yeah, I missed half of the session. Will there be another session?
Okay. Okay. That one you've got to ask UTLC. They are helping me with all this technical thingy. Inshallah,
I can get the slides for me to look through.
Inshallah. Well, I'm sure we can actually do another one. I'm sure.
Yeah, thank you. I look forward to that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Fauziah,
Yeah.
saya Aniza, saya nak tanya.
Yeah.
Kalau saya ada student 58 orang dalam satu kelas, saya ada student tak ada internet access langsung.
Okay.
Jadi saya tak boleh buat online assessment langsung lah ya?
Yeah. Dia macam ni, untuk you punya formative assessment delivery untuk yang kumpulan yang boleh tu teruskan. Cuma you boleh record kan. Tapi yang untuk pelajar you yang tak boleh access tu, you kena buat juga sama apa soalan yang you bagi online tu, you kena bagi secara printed pada dia untuk dia nak buat juga. Faham tak?
Quizzes ke apa pun kena bagi yang printed punya lah ya?
Yes. So you tak boleh bagi quiz yang sama lah sebab mungkin online assessment tu out of the question lah. Memang you kena bagi something that they can do dalam time frame yang sama.
Aduh. Okay.
Betul tak? Faham. Pasal tu nak buat macam mana sebenarnya, macam tu lah hakikatnya kepada pelajar-pelajar kita. Sama ada dia macam ni. Kalau you rasa pelajar tu kalaulah MCO ni tak ada dah, dia boleh usaha untuk carikan apa?
Internet wifi ke apa?
Internet. So you store your online assessment to the last. You do whatever that needs to be done first. But when yalah macam I kata tadi lah kan, kita tak tahu apa yang akan berlaku di masa hadapan. Jadi also get ready for the worst lah. So you have your alternatives lah. You dah ada, kalau A jadi macam ni, kalau B you kena plan lah supaya apa pun semua boleh bersiap dalam tempoh semester ni.
Lah, saya risau sebab student ni final sem.
Yes.
Tak boleh lah nak advise dia begitu ke apa kan.
Jangan, kesian dekat dia. Yes. Betul. Okay, thank you.
Terima kasih.
Ya, sama.
Dr. Fauziah, Assalamualaikum.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Okay, I'm glad you can hear me. Segan nak keluar daripada meeting room ni because it's like students going out earlier than lecturer.
Oh, tak apa. The lecturer is waiting just in case ada students yang nak tanya lepas semua orang leave.
Waiting. Just shoot my issue lah.
Okay.
Understanding and vision that the Malaysian education system is moving towards education 4.0 lah, teaching 4.0 lah, macam-macam. So this MCO has actually put us all in the test to test us lah kan.
Betul. We are dihumban ke dalam swimming pool. Yes.
So before this, when we prepared online learning lesson, we just put one size fits all to everybody, put it onto our UUM online learning and everything. We do not know if these lessons will actually reach our students. But during this MCO, when students go back to their hometown, then only when we do short survey, we found out that not everybody has a strong connection. Okay, when we do the understanding learners test too, we found for myself, I have 40 students, I get 2 students yang memang tak ada internet. So I was quite surprised to see your notes kalau tak ada internet, tak ada komputer tu. We have to print out notes, send pen drive and everything. Masih ada lagi zaman sekarang macam tu?
Nak buat macam mana?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's just sharing my
and this is where we have to let our voices heard. So whoever, betul lah macam saya kata, sekarang ni kita kena pastikan orang yang boleh membantu sediakan prasarana. Macam tadi poll tadi gitu, infrastructure kita yang everybody is concerned about infrastructure, right? So if everyone, doesn't matter where you stay in Malaysia, can get access to internet, no one can stop anybody from learning.
Okay. Thank you. Wonderful session, Dr. Fauziah.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah.
Assalamualaikum, Prof.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
It's me again, Ifa from TISA.
Okay.
I just wonder if among the students, some of them are able to access the internet access well, but some are not. Then can we still do the online teaching through the WebEx? But at the same time, we record our teaching, and then for those who are not able to join us during the meeting, they can use the recording lecture. Or do we have to wait for everyone to be able to join the meeting, then only we can apply that?
Can you do that? Do you think I'm asking you now, Ifa? Do you think that's possible?
Sorry?
Do you think that it's possible for those who do not have access to good internet? You want to wait until they have good access of internet for you to start your lesson? Do you think that I mean, if let's just say the MCO is actually extended, you know, how are we going to go about doing it? Because the class has to commence during a certain period of time, right?
Exactly.
So, having said that, that will mean that you have to do what is best for your majority of your students. That betul yang tadi yang saya kata, kalau your students, many of them have internet access, some of them have got mobile data access. So more of the asynchronous rather than the synchronous. So you cannot afford to have a 1.5 hours lecture like you always do in your face-to-face. No, you cannot afford to do that, because you have to remember your student is not just taking your course. Your student is also taking other people's course who will have to do synchronous as well as asynchronous activities. So that's why you limit your synchronous so that they still have the data, and when you put things in the LMS, they can actually download it when the internet is good, because sometimes it depends on the time, right?
Yeah.
I'm not very good at the technology, but I just based on our experience, you find that in the morning you can download anything. When it comes into the afternoon and evening, you start having problem. So yeah, those are the things that you can actually consider. So you let them have time for them to download it, read it, do the task. Tapi the task yang you bagi is not just notes. Dia mesti ada notes yang ada juga aktiviti-aktiviti yang dia kena fikir, dia kena relate, dia kena buat.
Okay.
Then they send it to you via online as well.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
But for those who cannot access, if you do have that yang tak ada access, same thing. But it's now you got to do it in the printed manner. Same questions, but it's just that it's now in printed. Yang tadi tu dalam bentuk online, yang ni dalam bentuk printed.
I see. Okay. But things have to move on now by the 27th.
Correct. So that's why prepare. Yeah. That's why you prepare for everything so that you don't fall short for not thinking ahead.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you again, Prof. Thank you.
No problem.
And thank you, Dr. Niza, as well for the good session today.
Alhamdulillah.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.